Before the Africa Twin, before the modern GS bikes, there was a motorcycle that conquered the world with a simple formula. A huge engine, bulletproof reliability, and a thirst for adventure. That motorcycle was the Honda Dominator 650. And today, I'm going to tell you the story of a legend that proved you didn't need anything else to go far. To understand the Honda Dominator 650, you have to travel back to the mid-1980s. When the world was fascinated by the rise of the Dakar Rally, many motorcyclists dreamed of crossing deserts and continents. But there was a problem. Racing bikes were uncomfortable for everyday use, while street bikes could barely leave the pavement. There was a huge gap between those two worlds. Riders wanted a bike that could travel long distances, handle dirt roads, and withstand years of use without turning into a mechanical nightmare. Most of them didn't need a race machine. They needed a reliable companion for any adventure that might come their way. And that's where Honda comes in. Instead of building an extreme bike, they decided to create a balanced one. A bike capable of traveling, exploring, working, and taking constant abuse without losing its essence. Honda understood something that many manufacturers ignored. Most people didn't want to race the Dakar. They just wanted a bike that would let them live, worry-free adventures. That philosophy would end up defining the Dominator throughout its entire history. It wasn't the fastest, the most powerful, or the most high-tech, but it could do almost everything and do it reasonably well. And that's exactly why it earned an extraordinary reputation. For being a simple, tough, and reliable bike. A machine that was always ready to start up and keep going. In 1988, Honda officially introduced the Honda NX650 Dominator, and from the very beginning, it was clear that this bike didn't fit neatly into any existing category. It wasn't a pure enduro like the competition bikes of that time, nor was it a touring bike designed exclusively for highway travel. And it definitely wasn't a sport bike obsessed with speed. It was something different, something that tried to combine several worlds into a single machine. In fact, the name NX itself perfectly explained the idea behind the project. Honda used that designation to identify its new X-over models, meaning bikes that mix different riding philosophies. And the Dominator was exactly that. A mix of trail bike, touring bike, city bike, and adventure companion. A motorcycle designed for the real rider, not for the professional racer. And when you take a closer look at the bike, you quickly understand why it was so successful. Because Honda didn't design the Dominator to stand out in a magazine comparison test. They designed it to live with its owner for years. It was a tall, comfortable bike with a relaxed riding position and a look inspired by the rally raids that were all the rage thanks to the Dakar. It had an adventurous presence, but without the intimidating size of other large displacement bikes, the Dominator gave off a very unique vibe. It seemed to say something like, "We can go to work today and cross a mountain tomorrow." And that was exactly what a lot of motorcyclists were looking for. But the real heart of the Dominator was its engine. A single-cylinder, 644 cubic centimeter engine, air and oil-cooled, equipped with Honda's famous RFVC technology, radial 4-valve combustion chamber. And this engine would end up becoming one of the most respected power plants in the entire history of Japanese trail bikes. Because it wasn't particularly sophisticated, it didn't have spectacular power, it didn't break records, but it had something much more important: reliability, and lots of it. The power was around 44 horsepower, a modest figure even for the late 1980s. But the Dominator never relied on maximum power to win over its users. Its real strength was its torque. From low revs, it pushed hard, making it possible to tackle tough roads, climbing hills and traveling loaded without constantly having to shift gears. It was a relaxed, calm, honest, and extremely tough engine. That's why many owners racked up tens of thousands of kilometers without opening up the engine beyond basic maintenance. And that was where the real magic was. While other bikes impressed you during a 20-minute test ride, the Dominator impressed you after 10 years of use. It wasn't the kind of bike you'd fall in love with because of a horsepower number. It was the kind of bike you'd fall in love with because it always started. In the cold, in the heat, after weeks sitting still, after endless trips, it just worked. And maybe that's the reason why the NX650 Dominator became a silent legend. Because a lot of bikes promise adventure. The Dominator simply took you to live them. No drama, no complications, and never leaving you stranded along the way. It was the kind of engine that seemed to say, relax, I'm not going to blow you away, but I'm not going to leave you behind either. And for thousands of travelers around the world, that ended up being much more valuable than any speed record. By the early 1990s, Honda already knew that the Honda NX650 Dominator had nailed the formula. The bike was reliable, versatile, and highly appreciated by its owners. That's why, instead of completely redesigning it, the brand decided to follow a very Honda-like strategy. Gradually improve what already worked well, without changing the essence that had made the Dominator so popular. The improvements focused mainly on the brakes and suspension. Honda aimed to offer a safer and more comfortable ride, especially for those who use the bike for long trips or tough roads. They weren't revolutionary changes, but they were improvements you could feel after thousands of miles, making the Dominator a more refined and enjoyable bike to ride. There were also advances in the electrical system and overall reliability. Honda took advantage of these years to fix small details and strengthen components that increased the bike's durability. Plus, a fresh palette of colors, graphics, and refined aesthetic enhancements appeared, helping to keep it looking current against competitors that were starting to undergo rapid modernization. Ergonomics weren't forgotten either. A series of minor adjustments were made to the seat, riding position, and some controls to enhance overall rider comfort during extended periods of time on the bike. This was especially important because more and more travelers were choosing the Dominator to cover long distances, and they needed a bike that was comfortable as well as tough. What's most interesting is that Honda never tried to turn the Dominator into a radical bike. While other brands were chasing more power or technology, the Dominator kept perfecting what really mattered: reliability, comfort, and easy to use. It wasn't a revolution. Instead, it was a constant evolution that ended up further strengthening its reputation as one of the most honest and durable dual-sport bikes of its time. During the 1990s, the Honda NX650 Dominator started building a reputation that Honda could never have bought with advertising. Thousands of travelers chose it to explore Europe, Africa, South America, and Asia. Little by little, it became one of those bikes that would show up in the most unexpected places, collecting stories, miles, and adventures. People started to see it as a companion that could go the distance and, most importantly, make it back. The reason was simple: reliability. The Dominator didn't stand out for its power or technology, but it had a reputation for being a bike that always made it back home. Its simple mechanics allowed for basic repairs pretty much anywhere in the world. It didn't need computers, complex sensors, or special tools. All you needed was some mechanical know-how and the desire to keep traveling to keep it running for years. While many bikes were starting to add more sophisticated systems, the Dominator kept betting on simplicity. That feature ended up becoming a huge advantage for travelers and adventurers. In remote places where there were no specialized workshops or advanced spare parts, a simple bike could be worth a lot more than a modern bike packed with technology. But the market started to change. During the 1990s, rivals like the BMW F650, Suzuki DR650, Kawasaki KLR 650, and Honda XL 650V Transalp appeared. They were more modern bikes, more refined, and with better performance. Little by little, the Dominator started to seem like a machine from another era, although for many users that was still part of its charm. At the beginning of the 2000s, stricter emissions regulations and new technological requirements arrived. Manufacturers began to adopt electronic fuel injection and more advanced engines. The old RFVC single-cylinder engine of the Dominator was still excellent, but it belonged to a previous generation. Eventually, Honda made the decision to end its production, closing an important chapter in the history of trail bikes. However, the bike disappeared from dealerships, but not from the memory of motorcyclists. The Dominator helped define the golden era of single-cylinder trail bikes and proved that a motorcycle doesn't need to win races to become a legend. It was never the fastest or the most advanced, but it was reliable, and in the end, the best adventures aren't had on the most impressive bikes, but on those that simply refuse to quit and keep on running when the pavement finally ends. And if you want to check out the top-rated off-road bikes, click on this video.